Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Ben, and this is another installment of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about books that I have recently finished. I'm going to be talking about two books today, both of which I finished before the end of May. After I'm done with this video, I'm going to film my May monthly wrap-up video. I'm inside my unfinished office, but it will only be unfinished for a short time. I'm actually taking a break from working and organizing in here. We are going to be putting some new furniture in here finally over the next week. We've already started a little bit. You can see some books that I'm organizing over on that side there. So I'm excited to actually have more of a functional room in here rather than just having piles everywhere. So when I start making videos next week or so, it should look pretty different behind me in here. So the two books that I'm going to discuss, they were both books that I did buddy reads with. And I'll start off with this one here, Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife by Bart Ehrman. I've read a couple of his books before, but it's been quite a few years. I had read Jesus Interrupted, I think is maybe what it was called, misquoting Jesus. I had read his The God's Problem. He is a biblical scholar, but he is notably one that lost his personal faith. I think that he is fairly popular as far as history of religion writers go among people who are on the more skeptical side. Now, I think that all of the stuff that he writes is scholarly solid. But it is something that me being a skeptic, I do kind of get attracted to a lot of his books. Now, the purpose isn't to make people lose their faith, but he is sticking to, basically what scholars believe. Now, this happens to be a look at the concepts of heaven and hell as they developed in a Judeo-Christian sense. Now, he pretty much contends that our current ideas are what, became especially the dominant Christian idea of an eternal heaven of bliss and an eternal hell of damnation were not, basically original to the Jews or even to the early Christians, and not something that the historical Jesus would have actually believed or preached about. Saying that he is an apocalyptic preacher, and he would have basically been believing and speaking of, and as well as the early Christians, of an apocalypse that would have been coming very, very soon, even within their own lifetimes. And it would not be sort of an eternal hereafter when you die. And they would have also believed in a bodily resurrection. So it's actually quite interesting. He basically starts off looking at the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is very much about the fear of death, that ancient king trying to basically find everlasting life. And it goes into Homer, with the Odyssey and the Iliad, and Greek concepts of the afterlife, and we get a little bit more with paganism. And it starts going through Judaism, and then, of course, into the Roman Empire. And we look at how a lot of the concepts that we think of as heaven and hell really started to evolve. And a lot of it had to do with, it seems, that coming apocalypse that those early Christians believed did not come to pass. So they had to kind of keep reinterpreting what they meant by by certain concepts of the afterlife until they got to this. Now, one thing that I was surprised that he didn't really go into, because there was something in here that he references that made me really think of it. He talks about an apocryphal story of Abraham. I think I have a couple tabs here, things that I was looking at, that made me believe. Which tab is it? Yeah, the Testament of Abraham, an apocryphal story about Abraham basically coming to the end of his life. He's was near 1,000 years old, and he doesn't want to die. So this angel starts basically taking him around on a tour of the world, and he sees everybody living in sin, so he wants to basically have them all destroyed, and he's killing them all. And finally he gets to the afterlife, and there's this large gate, and there's an angel with scales, and basically weighing his sins. And the whole thing actually reminded me a lot of the Egyptian book of Coming Forth by Day, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And he doesn't talk, there's like one or two maybe brief moments in here where he talks about Egypt, but I was surprised that we didn't get more of the Egyptian influence on concepts of the afterlife. Move over a little bit more here so you can see the book better. But I still found this really fascinating. There was one section here actually where he talks about essentially materialism in the Roman world. And last year I had done a buddy read, and I had read Battling the Gods, Atheism in the Ancient World, which looked at, atheism, and there's various ways that you can define it in that book, of the Greco-Roman world. And they never mentioned these epitaphs that were really interesting. I'll just read a couple here. Here's one epitaph on a Roman grave that I thought was interesting. It says, "Wayfarer, do not pass by my epitaph, but stand and listen. And then, when you have learned the truth, proceed. There is no boat to Hades, no ferryman Charon, no Acus, keeper of the keys, nor any dog named Cerberus. All of us who have died have gone below our bones and ashes. There is nothing else. What I have told you is true. Now withdraw, Wayfarer, so you will not think that, even though dead, I talk too much." Which I like. And there's also a Latin phrase that we end up seeing, which means I was not, I was, I am not, I care not. So I was just surprised, to not come across those sorts of things in that book, Battling the Gods, because those would have been terrific additions. I thought this was really interesting and engaging and well-reasoned. Towards the end, I felt like we got a little bit bogged down in apocryphal stories about the afterlife, but I think we definitely find our way back again. So if anybody's interested in this concept, I would certainly recommend this book. And the other thing that I read as part of a group read, this is the Gothic Book Club, sort of an informal, it's kind of become a bi-monthly Gothic book club. We're looking at various Gothic works, mostly in chronological order. I'm not rereading ones that, except for Frankenstein, we had reread. But for the most part, I'm not really reading things that I've read before. I'm kind of going for my blind spots, and I want a better understanding of how Gothic literature progressed or changed over time. So here we have Sweeney Todd, The String of Pearls, which that was the actual original title, The String of Pearls. Published as a serial, basically a penny dreadful, in 1846 through 1847. And then it was novelized, and it was so popular, they basically ended up continuing the serial and forgetting about pretty much how this book ended. So you can either read this version, which is, from my understanding, the original version, or you can read the incredibly long continuation that ended up happening. Now, for a long time, they really weren't sure exactly who wrote this. You can find various names attached to it, and there was a lot of suspicion that maybe there were multiple authors. I think of these penny dreadfuls as sort of like modern day, the way television shows are written. You have, basically one storyline going, but you have multiple writers, and sometimes we've had the recent writer's strike in Hollywood occur. So sometimes you have to grab things that have already been written and film those. And that's kind of what happens with this, which makes a very weird structure. So we have, of course, the eponymous Sweeney Todd. He's somehow mysteriously taking out his customers. Now, if you've seen the play doesn't leave anything to the imagination, and it reveals things that in this book are seen as like twists or revelations, which I was kind of surprised about. So if you know nothing about Sweeney Todd going in, there might be some twists in here that you wouldn't expect. But otherwise, the stuff that they show in the musical version, of course, Tim Burton did the very popular version of it. All that stuff is just revealed outright. There's no mystery involved. But this one, it's definitely seen as more of a mystery. We know that Sweeney Todd's customers are disappearing. We know that he's getting money. We don't have really any sense of revenge, or Sweeney Todd is not seen in any kind of sympathetic light whatsoever in this. No kind of weird family relations that we end up seeing in the play. in the musical. He's just a straightforward villain, and we have villains and heroes in this. And this is told with, a good amount of, there's actually a lot of humor in here as well. It was very fun, but it's an odd book because it was written, or I should say published, in a weekly serial, I believe. But there are some weird digressions, and they're pretty certain now that the author of this, at least the majority of it, was James Malcolm Rymer. And they, at least in this introduction for the Wordsworth edition, they surmise that there were maybe some weeks that he was not able to basically make his weekly deadline. And they've looked at these things sort of correlating with some legal troubles that he was having to appear in court. So there are two instances in this book where there's a digression. Basically, people inside a mental asylum telling a story. And they can be taken out, no problem, and the story would still make sense. One of them was probably written by Rymer, but it wasn't written for this book. It was probably something that he kind of had, in his back pocket. They said, okay, publish this real quick and add it to it. The second one really doesn't feel at all like it's the same author, and it was probably a different author that they, once again, filled in the space that week where he couldn't make it. So it's strange. There are certain plot lines that just kind of get lost and dropped, but that's kind of the episodic quality that we're dealing with here. And writers, may change in their minds or other things coming up in the process of things being published. So it is an uneven work. That doesn't have any polish. But that's kind of what's the quality that I like about these sorts of penny dreadful, publications. They are very unpretentious. They're very unassuming. They're basically, let's have fun. We know what you want, right? We want some craziness. We want some violence. We want to be entertained. Let's just have a good time with all of this. However, I would say that Rymer was still a pretty good writer. This is still well-written stuff, at least the stuff that he did. So these are the two books that I read. This one was a buddy read, and with two subscribers, actually. This was Sabrina and Stephanie. And this one was a larger group, actually, with some fellow booktubers. We had Greg from Another Bibliophile Reads. We had Mark with Book Time with Elvis. There was Sean from Sean D. Standfast, his channel. And also a subscriber, Sonia. And that was a good group. We actually had a really good discussion about all of this. And Sonia and I also, neither of us really had ever had an English meat pie. I've had a chicken pot pie here, but I guess they don't compare to the kind of meat pies that we see in Sweeney Todd. So we had a nice long conversation about meat pies in Britain. So if you've read either of these, I would recommend actually both of these, as long as you kind of know what you're getting into and what to expect. And if you have read them, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But as always, thank you, BookTube.